everyone. Creative Mornings Sacramento, appreciate all of you being here. Jenn Vaughn is a creative leader with 25 years of experience helping organizations bring their brands to life with clarity, purpose, and heart. Her career has taken her from boutique design studios to tech startups to mission-driven nonprofits. She currently serves as the creative director at UC Davis and is the co-founder of Future Focus Consulting, where she specializes in communication strategy, helping teams connect meaningfully with Gen Z and Gen Alpha through inclusive, culturally relevant messaging. Whether leading a rebrand, shaping campaign strategy, or mentoring a creative team, Jenn believes good design is ultimately about curiosity and connection. Outside of work, Jenn brings that same creative energy to raising a family, growing a garden, and spending as much time in the sunshine as possible. So Jenn, come on up.
Thank you. I can't see the, okay, no, I can't. I know what's going on, I promise you. Hello, everyone. I love to see all these smiling faces. I'm very excited to be with this big group of creatives. I have always considered myself creative my whole life. When I was in elementary school, I would submit my drawings and my short stories to the newspaper, like that was a thing back then, hoping that they would print them. Oh my gosh, Caroline, hi. Because I had a kids section like every Saturday, right? And they actually did. And it was like, oh, I can be famous, right? And then I went door to door to sell my drawings, like to my neighbors, like mainly of unicorns, you know, that kind of stuff. Oh, let's go back. Shh. In middle school and high school, I would throw parties just so that I would have an excuse to make invitations and menus, right? But one thing I never considered myself was punk. See? Right. Aw. This was me in first grade. Total nerd. Have never had a problem being a nerd, but, you know, that's who I was. My music taste is definitely not punk. It's more boy band. I have loved the New Kids on the Block since I was 10 years old. They were just on Good Morning America, so let's talk about that longevity. But what would a self-respecting nerd do when asked to talk about punk? So I looked up the definition, obviously. And so this is what I came up with, right? An attitude or mindset emphasizing individuality, resistance to mainstream culture, and freedom of expression. And I thought, okay, I can work with that, right? Because if I'm honest, I've spent most of my life feeling like an outsider. Like who I am and what I value has somehow always gone a little bit against the norm or the grain. So maybe punks and I were kindred spirits after all. In preparing for today, I realized that punk isn't just a sound or a style, it's a mindset. So that's what I want to spend this time exploring with you today. How punk, in its truest form, is an act of creativity, resistance, and courage. To me, one of the coolest things about the whole punk movement is that they co-opted that word punk, right? Historically, it was used as a derogatory word to talk about sex workers, people who are incarcerated, basically anybody that society deemed as rebellious or worthless. But the punk movement took that label, they reclaimed it as their own, and turned it into a symbol of power, pride, rebellion, and identity. So that's the first point I'm going to get into today, flipping the script on a label meant to limit you. Growing up as first-generation American, the label immigrant was always in the room, even when no one said it out loud. If I had $1 for every time someone asked me, "Where are you from?" I would be a millionaire. No one ever accepted the answer, "Oh, I'm from California." It was always like, no, where are you really from? And so I know it wasn't always meant to be cruel. Sometimes it was just about curiosity, but it was a constant reminder of my otherness. At home, my parents were always going on and on about how important it was to assimilate, right? To confine our culture to our house and fit in as much as possible outside of the house. I understood that to mean be as white as possible. Speak English without an accent, so they never taught me their language. Never bring a stinky lunch to school, right? Like, no. And pinch my nose, right, so it doesn't look so flat. And I want to be 100% clear. It wasn't just my parents telling me and my brothers to fit in. It was the media, it was the movies, the magazines, the TV shows. I never once saw anyone who looked like me on the cover of 17 magazine when I was growing up. And if you're Gen X like me, yay, you probably remember characters like Long Duck Dong in 16 Candles, right? A painfully clear example of how racist pop culture was in the 80s. So my parents telling us to assimilate wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It was survival. When you're first generation American, you learn very quickly how to morph from one thing to another, depending on the situation. You get really good at reading a room and code switching in order to fit in, all the while feeling like you don't fit in. It wasn't until I got to college that I learned that I started to let some of that veneer go, right? So I was raised in California, and I had every reason to stay close to home. But I randomly got this brochure from a small liberal art college in DC, and I thought, let's go there. So once there, I sort of fell into design, and that's another story for another day. But what I found at the design department at American University was acceptance. In my program, about half of the students were international. The faculty either came from other countries or had studied abroad. Every content, well, except for Antarctica, was represented in our classrooms. So our curriculum was informed, infused, and enriched by so many global perspectives. So for the first time in my life, the Western colonial perspective wasn't the default. Every voice was different, so every voice was equal. And that's the wonderful thing about art and storytelling. There's no single right or wrong, just the basic human experience. And what I found in my time, in my career, is that having a background outside of the typical Western American experience, that can be an asset. It gives you a broader context, right, to explore creativity. It gives you a unique lens to solve problems, to relate to others, to draw inspiration. It brings richness and texture and nuance into your work. I've grown to see being an immigrant as a superpower. Now I draw from the stories, traditions, customs, and especially food of my culture and other cultures, not as something to downplay, but as a source of strength. I would be remiss if I didn't speak to the moment that we're in right now. Because right now it can feel really scary and uncertain to be an immigrant in this country. And the language used in public discourse can often dehumanize, divide, and dismiss. But in the midst of all of this, do not let others define your worth. There are allies out there who stand with you and who are ready to help rise you up. Punk was never just a rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was about solidarity, community, the radical idea that no one gets left behind. So, whether your otherness shows up in your background, your body, your beliefs, your neurodiversity, whatever path you take, don't edit it out of the picture. Because the thing that you've always felt like you had to hide, that part of you that felt like it never quite fit, it might just be your sharpest tool, your clearest voice, your truest edge. Your weirdness is not a liability, it's your leverage. It helps you ask different questions, imagine different futures, see different angles. In a world that rewards conformity, your difference is where your power lies. So take a moment and ask yourself, what have I been told is too much? What part of me have I been softening, silencing, shrinking to blend in? And then ask yourself, what if that's exactly what the world needs more of? So punk wasn't just a label. It was born in the 1970s, just like me, as a creative revolt. A rebellion, not just against commercial music, but against oppressive systems. Political corruption, economic inequality, racism, sexism, consumerism, conformity, and apathy. It wasn't about sounding like the perfectly polished commercial music of the day. It was about sounding real, fast, raw, independent. And these bands did not wait for gatekeepers, right? They booked their own shows, they printed their own flyers, their own zines, they pressed their own vinyl. They experimented, they screamed, they created belonging for those who didn't see themselves reflected in the mainstream. So that brings me to a different kind of disruption, one that's a little quieter. My personal middle finger to the establishment is that I prioritize rest as much as productivity. We don't question that a song needs silence between the notes, literally called rests, or that a painting needs white space, or that a forest needs time to lie fallow to grow again. Did you know that a koala sleeps 18 to 20 hours a day? Like, everyone loves koalas. Be like a koala. But when it comes to ourselves, we hesitate. We ask, why am I so tired? As if the problem is us, not the pace. And it's not like rest is radical everywhere. Other cultures built it right into the rhythm of their daily lives, right? We have siestas in Spain and Latin America, fika in Sweden, tea time in the UK, keeping Sabbath or Shabbat in many spiritual traditions. But rest here, it's treated like weakness. We shouldn't feel guilty about resting. We weren't built for endless output. Humans, like everything in nature, are built for rhythms, right? Cycles of effort and of ease. Just like the seasons or the rise and the fall of the sun, we're meant to go through phases. We've evolved to wander, to create, to connect, to play, and to pause, right? And doesn't this just illustrate how ridiculous we've created this thing? So yes, science does back it up, right? Rest is good. It's good for your creativity. It's good for your productivity. So if that's your motivation to rest, great, go for it. But I want to invite you to rest for the sake of rest. Separate your worth from what you produce. Not every moment needs to be optimized. Have you thought of basking, loitering, daydreaming, playing for no reason? Play, pleasure, presence. These are not luxuries, right? They're part of being human. But today's world demands we operate like machines, always on, always producing, always responding. Hustle is considered the highest virtue, right? No wonder we're exhausted and feel disconnected. We live in a culture that thrives when we're too tired to dream, too busy to question, too burnt out to resist. But well-rested people, we notice, right? We get curious, we create, we question, we disrupt. And so maybe that's how we punk this system. Not by burning out, but by opting out of burnout altogether. Now I get it, rest can feel like a luxury. Punk was never about luxury. It was about creating your own rules. So I invite you, what if we stopped seeing rest as checking out, but started seeing it as checking in? Not every rest needs to be a nap or a vacation. Sometimes it can just be a pause, right, to regulate your nervous system. That's how we reclaim energy, clarity, and capacity. So my son is 11 now, but when he was younger, I was like a chicken with my head cut off and I'd forgotten how to rest. Like, what is even that? As he's gotten older, I've gotten a little bit more time and space to do that, so this is kind of what's been helping me lately, in case that might help you. I schedule small breaks throughout the day. My mantra is rest early and rest often. If you wait until you're tired, it's going to be that much harder to gain that all back. So on days that I have more flexibility, I am a champion of the Pomodoro timer. If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's the best. When the break timer goes off, I pause and I check in. Do I want to keep going or do I want to step away? If I choose in that moment to rest, I do something tactile, right? Working with my hands. I'll water the plants, I'll make a snack, I always have like my little art projects going on. I'll just kind of tinker around with that. Anything that gets me out of my head and into my body. On busier days, those days where you have meetings and all these other things going on, and you don't have time to set your own time, I use the transitions, right, between meetings, between tasks, between being a designer to being a mom, as mini resets. So I take a few deep breaths. I wiggle my toes, I stretch, I sway. I've started doing these somatic exercises, another thing to look up if you're interested. Anything that gets you back into your body. Now, sometimes that means in the hustle, it might mean I'm a little late, maybe a couple minutes late. But calm and presence matter more to me than being punctual on the dot all the time. No one questions if you have to take a bathroom break, right? Why not give your nervous system the same care? At night, I guard the last 2 hours of my day. That might sound a lot, but it takes a lot of time for my family to wind down. When I shut the door on the outside demands, I check in with myself and my family. After the barrage of the day, I ask, what do we need to feel whole and happy? How can we support each other? So there's, in those last 2 hours, there's still tasks and things to wrap up. But I approach this time with intention, right? I check in and say, how can we show up with each other so that we can end the day with ease, with joy, with comfort, with reverence, because these things are important to me and the happiness of my family. Time is finite. No one can rest for you. And if you don't choose rest on your terms, your body will choose it for you, most likely at the worst and inopportune time. Civil rights activist Audre Lorde said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. In a system that rewards overwork and calls it ambition, rest becomes a quiet protest. So my work at UC Davis involves studying Gen Z, right? And I love the trends that are coming out about them related to this. They've seen what burnout did to us older generations, right? How the constant grind led to exhaustion, relationship stress, health problems, and they're choosing differently, right? They're taking micro retirements or, short-term sabbaticals where they travel, they take pauses, they enjoy hobbies. Imagine that, spending time with loved ones. They don't want to wait until they're 65 to start living. And it's not because they lack ambition, it's an intentional design of their life, right? That values health, joy, and time, not just later, but now. So what would it look like for you to disrupt the status quo in your own life? Where could you carve out more space for rest, for joy, for whatever is important to you, for being fully human? If I've learned anything exploring punk for this talk, it's this. It's that punk is facing the world with creative courage. We've talked about punk as defiance, right, of grind culture, of performative perfection, of labels. We've talked about creativity as resistance, something that thrives in rest, honesty, and community. CreativeMornings gets that, right? It's so great that we have this place where individuality, honesty, and community matter. So if you've ever felt like you didn't fit in, maybe you're not punk. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're punk. Thank you for your time. I hope that you all found something that resonated, and I'd love to connect.